Morning, Kate.
Good morning, Ben. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I've just
Good.
noticed I've got the same top on today that I've got on in my picture.
Is that right?
That is right. That was not
Crikey.
planned.
Perhaps you need to go shopping, get some new
Yeah, I
stuff.
think I do. Yeah, yeah. I think. Yeah, well, that's my excuse now. I'm going straight after the webinar. Done.
Do you ever think about what you've worn on previous webinars and what you're wearing this time?
Yeah, I got a stripy top out this morning. I thought, oh, I think I wore that last time.
I think if you go on YouTube and watch all the previous ones, yeah, you'll probably notice that there's a lot of similarity. Good morning, everybody. We do know the webinar started. We're just as usual letting people log in before we crack on. Right, we kick things off.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Oh, right, okay. So yeah, good morning, everybody. Welcome again to the next in our Agency Masters webinar series today on Let Go to Grow. Before we dive in, for those who don't know me or haven't met before, I'm Steve. I'm the sales director here at Synergist. And as usual, I'm joined by my webinar co-host, Kate, who is a principal consultant at Synergist, but also somebody who has years of experience, Kate, working with plenty of agencies in operations and finance roles. So thank you once again for joining me, Kate.
Always a pleasure, Ben. Always a pleasure.
You have to as well as
I
contractual.
do. Apparently, I have to, but I don't know.
So today's webinar is slightly different to the ones we've done in our usual sessions. So today we're not talking about resource planning, forecasting, finance. Instead, we're talking about something that we've seen time and time again after working with hundreds of agencies over many years. Today we're talking about growth. Now, not how to grow, but what agencies go through and what growth means for agencies. Because the one thing we've learned is that winning more clients isn't usually the hardest part, although I know it can feel that way at the moment. The real challenge is actually recognizing when the way you've always led the business is no longer the way the business needs to be led.
And that is something that we see all the time. So most agencies don't reach out because they've suddenly become bad at what they do, quite the opposite. It's because they've grown, the team has grown, the client base has grown, and the complexity has grown. But the way the agency operates not necessarily has evolved in the same pace.
And that's where today's title comes from, Let Go to Grow. Because every successful agency eventually reaches a point where something that helped it succeed starts to hold it back. So it might be the founder making every decision, it might be outdated processes, or it might be simply trying to run a 50-person agency the same way that you ran when you were a team of 10.
So, over the next 20 minutes, we're going to look at why that happens, how to recognize the signs, and some practical ideas that we've seen help agency navigate the next stage of growth.
So let's start with a simple question. Why does growth make running an agency so much harder? So if you've built an agency, you might recognize this picture. So in the early days, everything is very quick. You've got everybody sitting together, clients can speak directly to the founders, problems are solved in minutes, and that speed is probably one of your biggest strengths. But as the business grows, you hire more people, you win bigger clients, and add new services. And without noticing it, the way you've always worked starts becoming much harder.
And that's completely normal, right? Nothing's broken. The business has simply become more complex. So the conversations that worked with 10 people don't work with 30. The visibility that you had as a founder naturally starts to reduce.
So growth doesn't just change the size of your business, it changes the way it needs to be led. And from Kate, obviously you work with lots of agencies in terms of some synergist. Is that when agencies typically start looking at new systems?
Yeah, exactly that sort of time. So, and software doesn't create growth. It's because the growing agencies sort of need better visibility, clearer processes, and more consistency than they ever have needed before.
And we know a great system that can do that for them.
We do indeed.
So I think one of the biggest myths is that agencies struggle because they stop winning work. In reality, the opposite is often true because success can create complexity. As Kate said, every new client, every new service, every new recruit, it adds another layer. So then communication becomes harder, people start to specialize, departments emerge, and then suddenly your founder can't see everything that they once could. So going back to the synergist thing, Kate, when you're implementing synergist, do you find that the agencies you work with describe it in that format?
No, 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 absolutely not. So they describe the symptoms instead. So things like leadership meetings feel longer, projects are harder to keep track of. So that's probably the most popular one.
Yeah.
Managers are waiting for decisions, and everyone feels a lot busier. So what they're actually doing is they're experiencing the complexity.
Complexity, is it?
Yeah, that word, that one that's really easy to say. They just don't necessarily call it that.
I think that's probably the key. I think, yeah, before we can solve the problem, we need to recognize what's really causing it. And the good news is that this isn't just something random that's happening. There is actually a predictable pattern. Now, some of you might recognize this graph. So we've talked about the symptoms of growth, but the interesting thing is that every agency actually follows a pattern. It hits the same pressure points in roughly the same order. So whatever the agency or whoever's running it, and in fact, it's true of almost every growing business.
So, one of the best known models for this was developed by a guy called Larry Grainer, and he identified 6 phases of business growth. And although it was created many decades ago, it still holds up remarkably well for agencies today. So, the key idea is that every phase works for a while until it doesn't. So, eventually, each stage runs into a crisis that forces the business to change the way it operates. And that's what allows it to move forward into the next phase.
And it starts with the top left-hand corner, growth through creativity. So that's your entrepreneurial energy. It gets the business off the ground, but eventually that runs into a crisis of leadership because that enthusiasm alone isn't enough to keep a growing business organized. So then we move to the right, and then we get to growth through direction, which is eventually leads to a crisis of autonomy. So as people want more freedom, then your structure possibly allows. And then we get to growth through delegation, which then creates a crisis of control as your teams begin to operate much more independently.
After that comes growth through coordination. So, where businesses introduce more processes and structure to bring everything back together. But over time, that can create a crisis of red tape. So, where the very process designed to help start getting in the way. The later stages are collaboration and alliances, and they continue the same pattern as organizations expand across offices, regions, and sometimes multiple companies.
And the good news is that most agencies obviously don't experience all of these overnight, but most of you listening today are probably somewhere in the middle of that curve. So for today, rather than covering the whole model, we're going to zoom in on the 3 phases that we tend to find growing agencies commonly experience most often. And more importantly, what can we do about them? Okay, so the crisis of autonomy. So this is the stage we typically see when an agency reaches around 10 to 30 people. So exciting times, you've recruited talented people, clients are coming in, business is growing, but there's one problem. Your founder is still very much at the center of almost every important decision. So the team has grown to the point where one person simply can't be involved in everything anymore. Yet somehow every estimate, every tricky client conversation, every commercial decision still seems to find its way back to the same person.
And that's completely understandable. The habits that help you build a successful agency don't just disappear overnight. And that when you spent many years making every decision yourself, letting go just isn't just a practical change, it's a personal one as well.
Yeah, because I think it's kind of, your reputation has probably been built on knowing every client, on every project, on every detail. So stepping back can absolutely feel uncomfortable. And it can feel like you're losing control, but in reality, all you're doing is creating the space for other people to step up.
And there are usually some very familiar warning signs. So, projects waiting for one person's approval, commercial decisions sitting in an inbox, managers asking permission for things that they are more than capable of deciding for themselves. And it's not because people lack ability, it's quite the opposite. It's because the business hasn't quite let go yet.
And I think that's the real leadership shift at this stage. So success stops being about making every decision yourself and starts being about building a team that can make great decisions without you. Okay, so if that's the challenge, what actually fixes it? Now, the leadership shift at this stage is moving from very much doing to delegating, or perhaps probably more accurately, from being the person who solves every problem to being the person who enables other people to solve them.
And from what we've seen, that usually comes down to four things.
Okay, first, giving people genuine ownership. There's no point asking somebody to take on responsibility if every important decision still has to come back to you for approval. We know ownership only works when it's matched with the authority to make decisions.
Yeah. And secondly, build visibility. So, one of the biggest reasons founders struggle to let go is because they worry that they're going to lose sight of everything that's happening. So, you need good reporting, regular one-to-ones, and the right systems to give you confidence to step back without feeling disconnected from the business.
Third one, I think this is possibly the hardest one I struggle with. It's coaching rather than answering. So when somebody brings you a problem, it's resisting the temptation just to solve it immediately. So instead, we need to ask, what would you do to help them think it through? Because every time you answer it for them, you're teaching them just to bring the next problem straight back to you.
And finally, review decisions and learn from them. So maybe someone extends a deadline or agrees some additional work without charging for it. Don't review it to catch people out, review it together so they understand the impact of that decision and so everybody learns from it. And that's how judgment can develop over time.
I think when you get these four things right, something really powerful happens. Decisions stop waiting for one person, your managers become more confident, people grow into their roles, and the agency starts making decisions at the pace the business actually needs. But once you've successfully delegated and empowered your managers, another challenge starts to emerge. So, how do you keep everybody moving in the same direction without taking back control? Okay, so as you mentioned, you've built that strong leadership team, people are making decisions, the business is growing again, it's all good. But then something else starts to happen. Different teams begin solving the same problems but in different ways. So maybe projects are run differently. Clients have slightly different experiences. Reporting isn't consistent. Nobody's doing anything wrong. They're just making decisions independently.
And that's what Grainer called the crisis of control. So the issue isn't that you've lost control, it's that you've gained independence without enough consistency.
And that's where founders often make the wrong move. Their instinct is to pull decisions back to themselves. And for a while, that can feel reassuring, but very quickly, they become the bottleneck all over again. So, based on that situation, Kate, what would you say would be a better approach?
I think probably trying to resist the change to look over everyone's shoulder. If people know what good looks like and have the information that they need, they'll usually make the right call.
Okay, so the goal isn't just kind of controlling every decision, it's creating confidence that every good decisions are being made by somebody. So, how do you create that consistency without slowing everybody down? Well, for me, it's about coordinating without re-centralizing. What does that mean? So this is something that we see a lot of time at agencies, and typically when they reach around 30 to 80 people. So again, you've got talented people, capable managers, but now you're too big to rely on everybody just knowing how to do things or how things should be done. The agencies that navigate this stage successfully tend to have four things in common. So the first is shared standards. So the best agencies agree a common way of scoping work, producing quotes, reporting. So that doesn't mean that every team works identically, but everybody understands what's expected and what good looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about creating consistency without taking away flexibility. So teams still have the freedom to deliver in their own style, but they're all working to the same standards.
Second is something that we bang on time and time again, but it's consistent reporting. So if every department measures success differently, it's impossible to compare performance or spot problems early. So your leadership team shouldn't be spending their time working out whose numbers are right.
Absolutely. So when everyone's looking at the same information, conversations become much more productive. So you stop debating the data and start talking about what action to take.
Next, we've got coordination roles. So as the agency grows, somebody needs to be joining the dots across the teams. Now, typically that could be an operations director, delivery lead, PMO. The important thing is that projects and decisions don't all have to flow back through the founder.
Exactly. So those sort of roles create alignment across the agency, leaving leaders free to focus on the bigger picture instead of constantly firefighting.
And then finally, one shared picture. When everybody's working from the same source of truth, you can see how the whole agency is performing. You can spot where standards are slipping and identify issues early and hopefully support teams before those small problems become big ones.
Absolutely. And that's what really what visibility is all about. It's not about checking every project or every decision. It's about having enough confidence in the information that you only need to step in when it really matters.
And that's the outcome you're aiming for. The team keep their independence, managers keep making decisions, leadership keep visibility, and instead of feeling like lots of separate departments, the agency starts operating as one business again.
Absolutely. So, what about when the process gets in the way? So, this is something we typically see when agencies get to around 80 to 200 people. As agencies continue to grow, they naturally introduce more structure, so more processes, more governance, more approvals, and it's all with good intentions. The problem is, over time, those processes can become sort of more complex than they need to be.
And this is where you hear people saying, like, well, it's quick if I go around that process, or why do we need three approvals? When that starts happening, the process has stopped helping the business.
And that's Grainer's final stage. So, where the systems have once supported growth, begin slowing them down.
So is the answer then to have fewer processes?
No, absolutely not, Steve. We all like a good process.
Yep.
It's just making sure that you have better processes and you keep in the governance, but you lose in the friction.
Gotcha. Okay. So what does a better process actually look like? Okay. So by the time agencies, as Kate said, get to around 80 to 200 people, you can see another shift. So they've built the capable teams, you've created alignment, you've introduced processes and governance, all of which do exactly the right thing. But over time, there's a temptation to add another approval, add another meeting, another process. Before long, very things that helped your agency grow start to slow it down. So the fix isn't more process, as Kate said, it's less but better. And from what we've seen, this comes down to four things. So number one is challenging every step. So if removing it won't change the outcome for your client or improve the quality of work, it's probably bureaucracy that rather than a good process.
Yeah, great processes make it easier for people to do great work. If they're creating friction without adding value, then they're worth challenging.
Second is trusting judgment over sign-off. So by this stage, you've hired experienced people, so let them use that experience. Approvals should add value, not simply exist because they've always been there.
And third, very important, every important decision needs one clear owner. So not a committee, not 20 billion people copied into an email, one person who's accountable for making the call. And lastly, keep improving. So, in my previous agency, I went through the ISO 9001 accreditation, which I try to forget, to be honest, but there we go. But one principle that stayed with me ever since is continuous improvement. So, when something goes wrong, don't just fix the issue, understand why it happened and improve the process so it's less likely to happen again. And the agencies that continue to scale are the ones whose processes keep evolving alongside the business.
And that's really the outcome that you're aiming for. Keep the coordination and consistency that you've built without losing the pace and agility that made the agency successful in the first place. Okay, so we've looked at three different leadership challenges, but they're all pointing to exactly the same lesson. So if we look back at those three stages together, we talked about autonomy, control, red tape. And on the surface, they look completely different challenges, but underneath, they all follow exactly the same pattern. Every one of them starts with something that worked. So being the founder who made every decision, delegating and trusting managers, introducing processes that brought the structure as the business grow. So none of these were mistakes. In fact, they're exactly what helped the agency become successful. The challenge is holding on to them for longer than the business needs them.
And that's something that we see all the time. So the agencies that continue to grow aren't necessarily the ones with the best people or the cleverest strategy. They're the ones whose leaders recognize when it's time to evolve.
And the quote on screen at the moment, this is something we come back to time and time again, something that we use very much in our own business. But what got you here won't get you there. And I think that pretty much sums up today's webinar pretty perfectly. Okay, so from what we've covered, Kate, what one question would you encourage every agency leader on this call to ask themselves after today's session? If you had one, what would it be?
So I think it would be something quite simple, like what are we still doing today because it worked brilliantly 3 years ago? And what might be, is it holding us back now? And that's a powerful conversation to have because every growing agency will have something on that list.
Yeah, and I think growth doesn't ask you to throw everything away. It asks you to recognize what served its purpose and then have the confidence to let it go. And that creates space for the next stage of the business. So the final question is, once you've recognized the need for change, how do you actually make that change stick? So it's okay recognizing the need to let something go, but actually making the new way of working stick is something entirely different. Because for most people, change means leaving something familiar behind. And even when the change is clearly the right thing to do, it can still feel like just one more thing that's competing in an already busy day.
And that's where so many change programs fall down, right? So you can spend months designing the perfect solution, new decisions, shared standards, simpler processes. But if you don't manage the change itself, even the best ideas will struggle to succeed.
Yeah, because we know that change just doesn't happen. It does need proper leadership. It needs time, it needs commitment. It can't be something that you squeeze in 10 minutes on a Friday afternoon at the end of the week.
Absolutely. So, what does good change management actually look like? So, for me, it comes down to three things. So, firstly, bring your people with you. Explain why the change is happening and listen to their concerns. Have conversations rather than simply announcing this is a new way of working.
Next is guiding people through it. So provide proper training, communicate regularly, give people opportunities to ask questions and get involved. The more ownership people feel, the more likely you are to embrace the change.
And finally, don't stop at launch. Keep reinforcing the new behaviors and make sure you're celebrating the early wins. Then keep coaching and supporting people until the new way of working simply becomes the normal way of working.
And I think that's probably the biggest lesson of all. Change isn't really about process, it's about people. And as the slide says, when you win hearts, the habits usually follow. Okay, so that brings us towards the end of today's webinar. As usual, we'd like to leave you with three key takeaways.
So I'll take the first one. So name the crisis. So whether it is autonomy, control, or red tape, most agencies on this call are living through one of them right now. So name it so you can fix it.
Second thing is, as I mentioned, every crisis in this session started with something that used to work. So holding on to it past its moment is what turns a strength into the next crisis.
And lastly, manage the change. So knowing the fix isn't enough. Share why before the what, lead from the top, and say it more than once. And that's what will actually make it stick.
So that brings us to the end of today. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope this has given you a fresh perspective on what growth really looks like and the leadership challenges that come with it. You can find this recording, we'll send it out, but you can find this recording and our previous Agency Masters webinars and also the A Game series on our YouTube channel. So we'd also love to connect with you on LinkedIn. Thanks once again for your time, and remember that every stage of growth asks you to let something go, to recognize what it is, and you'll be ready for whatever comes next. Have a great day, and look forward to you joining us on the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.